Okay, let me get started with just a few pointers for class tonight. And then for the bulk of our class, the huge middle section, once I lay out the pointers, I intend for this class to be mostly conversation. So I hope that you read, and I hope you're feeling like you want to talk tonight. There's always the alternative to listen to me, but you have an opportunity tonight to not have to do that. So let me tell you about tonight, what I think about this class. There is so much ground to cover. It's impossible for us to do what we need to do and to go as deeply into all of the things that would be interesting to pursue with this story. I am approaching this class tonight as a starter. Does anybody make bread? I don't have any idea. Jacob, you're a bread maker? What's the deal? I've heard people say something about a starter with bread. You can't make bread unless you have something to start it. Sourdough. You gotta have. So if I want to make sourdough, you have to give me something to start it, and then I can make sourdough myself. I know what I'm doing. You can make it yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Probably not. I'll just leave the bread to you. Tonight is a starter. Tonight is a class where we're going to try and get a big picture. And the real value in this study for me has been every day of the week just letting it simmer and think about it and talking about it with Becky, and you read it some more. So take what we do tonight. Just take what we do tonight as sort of a, here's what I'm going to think about. And then please go home and read the text by yourself or with whoever you live with, your spouse or your roommate, and then talk about it. Like, let this be a starter. That's what I want to happen. I need to wear a button-up shirt because this thing's not going to stay on me tonight. So, number one, I told you from the start, and every time I click the button, I regret that I don't have the triangle structure laid out on here, but this one kind of shows you. We're in the downward spiral where each of the judges gets worse and worse and worse and worse. The situation in Israel gets worse and worse. But the thing to note about this downward spiral is that Jephthah is blue, which means that his story matches up with Ehud's story. And so here are some things that seeing the similarities between Jephthah and Ehud helped me understand both. When I was stuck on Ehud and I didn't know what God's point was, I looked at Jephthah and it helped me to understand Ehud. And when I was stuck with Jephthah, I looked at Ehud. So just a couple things. Both of these are Transjordan. Focus Moab and Ammon. Ehud fights against the Moabites. Remember, Eglon is a Moabite in chapter 3. And up on the board behind me, remember Moab and Ammon are both sons of Lot. And so there is that connection between these two things. It's kind of a weird deal. Jephthah's main enemy is the Ammonites, but he kind of treats the Ammonites as if they're Moabites. And we might get to see some of that a little bit tonight. Both of them deal with an 18-year oppression. Both of them are mighty warriors. Remember, Ehud is a left-handed guy, and the left-handers are people who have specifically trained and prepared themselves to be extra battle ready. And then Jephthah's story starts in 11 and verse 1. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. So we're dealing with two people in this tier. Both of these guys have messages to foreign kings. Ehud says to Eglon, the king of Moab, I have a message from God for you. And the message is, he assassinates him. Jephthah actually has a pretty long, you can see the verses here, verses 12 through 28. He actually has a long section where he's communicating with the king of Ammon. And so that's something in common between these two stories. They both have to do with sacrifice. And just from the very start, if you remember the Eglon story, he's described as a fat man. And that fat, we spent a lot of time looking into that fat. He is a fatted calf ready for slaughter. And so this is a sacrifice story with Ehud. Jephthah's most famous in his story for sacrificing his daughter. If you will give me the victory in this battle we're about to fight, I'll give you whatever comes out of my house first. And it was his daughter. And so sacrifice is a common thing. In the Ehud story, remember after he killed Eglon, he went and Jewish people from the hill country of Ephraim came and took the fords of the Jordan River to cut off the enemies of God's people. In the Jephthah story, we're going to see Jephthah and Israel taking the fords of the Jordan River in order to kill Ephraimites. And so there are lots of connections between these stories that will help us to see, I think, a lot of the main point. You're welcome to interrupt me at the first part of this introduction stuff if you want. Basically, Jephthah's story, we're going to talk about, it's divided into 5 sections. The first section it's just like an introduction of what's going on in Israel that sets up the story for Jephthah. Israel has decided to worship 7 gods. And God says, I have delivered you 7 times from all of these people, and I'm not doing it anymore. Go cry out to the gods you're worshiping. And so that's the first section. The second section has to do with Jephthah and his family. He is the son of a prostitute, and his dad's family run him out of town. And he basically becomes a wild man, a warrior in the wilderness. And they need somebody to lead them in battle, so they say, hey, Jephthah, let's go get Jephthah. And Jephthah says, I thought you didn't want me around. You ran me out of town. They said, if you'll come and fight for us, then you can be our leader. So that's the second story. The third story has to do with Jephthah and Ammon, the enemy, and there's this long conversation about who has the land and why. And then there's the section of Jephthah and his daughter. If you will give me the victory in this battle, then I will offer you whatever comes out of my house first. That's 11:31. Whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. And that's this thing that happens with his daughter. And then in chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, there's Jephthah and Ephraim, which this ought to sound really familiar. Because the same sort of thing happened with the Gideon story. 12:1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go out with you? The Ephraimites said the same thing to Gideon, and remember, Gideon fixed it. Jephthah says, you want to run your mouth at me? I'm going to kill all of you. He didn't fix it. Well, he did fix it, but in a different way. So 5 stories. And this is how I would like for our conversation to go tonight. I want to go story number 1. In every single one of these stories, we're going to see conflict. There's always conflict. Jephthah's story is characterized by conflict, contention. You see it in chapter 12 and verse 2, really, really good. Well, that's not true. You don't see it really good in 12 and verse 2. 12 and verse 2 in almost all of our Bibles, to them, I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites. If you treat the Hebrew literally, just read it literally, here's what it says. A man of great strife I was, and my people, and the Ammonites. That's worth writing in the margin of your Bible. That's a literal treatment of verse 2. A man of great strife I was, and my people, and the Ammonites. That's a really good one to start this because all of these stories are filled with strife. I want to go through each one of these, and I just want to ask, where do you see the strife? Where's the fighting? Where's the contention? What does it look like? There's lots of words. One commentator diagnosed Jephthah with OMS. That's open mouth syndrome. You see it, I think, in chapter 11 and verse 35. The name Jephthah, the word Jephthah means he will open. That's what his name means. He will open. In verse 35, as soon as he saw her, his daughter, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies." There's lots of words throughout this section. The words go with the conflict a lot. And then there's lots of self-interest and manipulation. Everybody in all 5 of these stories is out for number 1. It's all about me. What can I get out of this? So, before we jump into talking about this, is there anything you want to say in the way of introduction to the story? All right. Then let's just start. I sent out an email. I hope that you had a chance to read this, because we're not going to be able to read the text. Maybe we can point to some things, or you can, as we go. But the first section, chapter 10, verses 6 through 16, Israel's problem with God. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the Ammonites. Let's just start. Where do you see conflict, words, and what's happening with the words, and self-interest in this section? Where do you see these 3 things? Or how do you see these 3 things? Yeah, Dave, is that your hand?
Yeah. I'm just going to count you first. When you introduced it this way, it showed 5 different conflicts, I guess you could say, with Jephthah and Yahweh versus Israel. When you began it with Yahweh versus Israel, it made me see an overall perspective of the conflict of God trying to persuade his people still that he is the one that they should follow. I am the one who's reminding them, who was it that delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hands of all the people that you're now in pursuit of their gods. And then what God does here in his jealousy gives them away. He sends them away, more or less, while in the promise. Wait, no, they're not in the promise.
Yeah, they are.
Yes,
they are. Yeah.
While in the promised land, and God is bringing conflict to them to help bring them back after something we've discussed before, 18 years of serving the Baals and that whole generation of people that learned that way to serve these other foreign gods, and probably with God, like with Yahweh, serving God and these other gods at the same time is my assumption, because that would make sense with this plurality of gods to serve them all. But obviously God's not that way. He will not tolerate that. And so they've become, as we've studied in Isaiah, they've become what they worship.
Mm-hmm.
And so God destroys them, or begins to destroy them, or puts his hand against them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not allowed to do this. In verse In verse 6, you see they serve, count them up, they serve 7 different gods. And then at the end of verse 6, it says, and they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. Let's start with this. Why would they serve other gods? Why would Israel do that? Why would anybody serve any god for that matter? I mean,
they're so close to the influence. They're in many cases living among these people in the same towns. They have the same commerce, it's the same culture. And so they've lost this distinction, this holiness between them and the nations whom they were supposed to conquer.
yeah. Yeah. And so when you live next to the people of the land who worship these gods, what do you do when you need it to rain, to water your crops? Well, what do? They pray to their God and ask for rain. And here comes the rain. Hey, look, their God gives the rain. Let's go to their God for rain. And what do you do whenever it's time for, fertility? You need your animals to be fertile and to produce so you can have your next flock for next season. And look, these people over here, they ask their God for fertility, and he gives them fertility. And so we'll go ask their God for fertility. And this is a lot of the self-interest part of this. And with self-interest in mind, you may accuse me of just being overly critical at the very start of this, and you can. But I would ask you to just reserve judgment till the end of this. Verse 10, the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals. And apparently, what strikes me about this is the one and only confession of sin in the book of Judges. They oftentimes cry out to God, but this time they confess their sin, which is kind of a big deal. And God's response to this confession is, did I not save you from the Egyptians, from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, from the Philistines, the Sidonians, also the Amalekites, the Manites who oppressed you? And you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand, yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, we've sinned. Do whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. I like that. It sounds really good. But every single commentary that I looked into on this section says almost the exact same thing. Israel's problem is that they are loyal to any and every god who will give them what they want. Israel has chosen and served other gods when it seemed beneficial to do so. In the same way, Israel served the Lord when it seemed like the best option. But God sees this for what it is, a disloyal display and a manipulative measure, and he's not going to be used. We've been oppressed for 18 years. God, we're sorry. Save us. And God says, you're not sorry. You just want something from me. Did you have something a second ago?
Yeah, I was thinking too, with what Brian was saying, with these, they're seeing the results, like you were saying too. They're seeing the fertility, they're seeing these surrounding countries just growing and producing, and that's what they want. And so they see that they're attributing it to these gods, and so why wouldn't they do that? And then I think about us. Well, what do we want? Well, we want people in the pews. We want souls to be saved. We want elders. We want people that are going to strive around our youth and older people and everyone like that. We want all that, and there's congregations around us that do that. But at what cost? There's a youth group, and what's being produced out of that? Is it Christians? Is it people that love souls? Or is it just this simple togetherness as opposed to drawing near to the Lord
Yeah.
as a family, not isolating people simply because of age or anything like that?
Yeah. Self-interest. So getting what I want, Mark.
The theme throughout all these sections is selfishness. here you have the Israelites being selfish. You know, if I confess these things to God, maybe he'll give me this relief. You know, I can be saved from this oppression. And they've already tried everything else, and now they come to God and say, if, you know, they confess their sins and say they've got to have him back, and they'll do whatever he tells them to do. That's a selfish motivation.
Yeah.
Jephthah, in the next section, tells the people, if I am delivered, verse 6, I think, verse 9, if you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. You know, he's, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. And then he makes the same kind of vow about whatever comes out of his house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you do this, I will do this. And then with Ephraim, it's like he says, you guys didn't do these things for me, so I'm going to do this to you. It's still selfish, selfish, selfish. Every single one of these sections.
Yeah. Selfish is probably a better word than self-interest there. And then I really wanted to just try and leave it to one word. Selfish would be good, but I felt like I had to include the word manipulation because everybody is manipulating in order to get their way. Which moves us, let's just move the ball forward. You can still make your comment if you have a comment on this one, but let's keep moving forward just a little bit. Into the second story, we're going to look for conflict. There's lots of talking involved, and there's lots of manipulation and self-interest. In verse 18, the leaders of Gilead say, who is the man that will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Jephthah's not the only one who makes a rash vow in this story. This is an unfortunate thing to have been said. In verse 1 of chapter 11, we find out why. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. And Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. And look at this. And worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out to him. And the people of Gilead, in verse 6, they said to Jephthah, come and be our leader that we may fight against the Ammonites. They did exactly with Jephthah what Israel did with all their other gods. I need something right now and you can give it to me. And they treated Jephthah just like they treated their other gods. In spite of the fact that we have rejected you, that you're the son of a prostitute, that you have surrounded yourself with all of these worthless people, we think you can give us what we need right now. And they make this rash vow to say, if and you can be our head. And Jephthah is negotiating and manipulating in order to get what he wants out of the situation. In verse 9, Mark said it a minute ago, Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, the Lord will be witness between us if we do not do as you say. So here is this vow to God to move forward with the very thoughtless, wrong plan. What do you want to say about that? And especially, what are you seeing in the story, especially with conflict and OMS, open mouth syndrome, and with self-interest and manipulation? I think I kind of ruined that one. I said it, a lot of it. I'm sorry about that. Other comments, though? Yep, Jesse?
The phrase worthless fellows is also used with Abimelech.
Yeah.
It kind of tying the two together as kind of some rough characters.
Mm-hmm. As you see anything else that's similar with Abimelech too? Especially.
His heritage. I mean, he wasn't one of the family, really.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't a part of the
Yeah. And so we would say, oh man, Abimelech, is he even really a judge? That's kind of crazy. Why is he there? We spent a whole time talking about how rotten Abimelech is, and now Jesse and Mark are saying, wow, Jephthah sounds a lot like Abimelech. There's a lot of common ties here, making us think of the same guy and the same stuff. That's just a part of this being a great literary work. Anything else on the second story? Let's do 4 and 5 next. I think if we see the common thread in all of these stories, it helps us to appreciate number 3, the irony of number 3. So number 4, jump down to chapter 11 and verse 29. The Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and he passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and he passed on to the Ammonites. I think when I read that, I think about what God said to Gideon in chapter 7 and verse 2. The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Jephthah had everything that he needed. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him. He was ready to go and win. But he's got a big mouth. And not only that, I think he's thinking like the people of the land that he is supposed to be fighting against. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, Jephthah, the Spirit of the Lord is upon you. What do you mean if you'll give the Ammonites into my hand? If you'll do this for me, God, if you'll give the Ammonites into my hand, whatever. That word whatever could also be whoever. Does anybody's Bible say whoever? Or have a note, a text note? You got a note. It could be whatever, whoever. It could be whoever. It's kind of a weird thing to say. Whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return home in peace, you know, what was he expecting? His sheep to come and greet him when he got home? I mean, my dog greets me when I get home, so I can imagine, but I don't really know what he was imagining here when he said these words. Whatever comes out of my house to greet me, if you give me victory, I'm going to give it to you, God, as a burnt offering. Where do you see the conflict? You see the words. Where do you see the conflict in this story, and where do you see the self-interest and manipulation? This one, look at the conflict here. In verse 35, his daughter is the one who comes out to greet him. He tore his clothes. Oh, I think we should probably say something about this too. In verse 34, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines, with dances. She was his only child. And the text goes extra far to let us know, besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and he said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble for me. I opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. What's your reaction? I mean, before I'm going to avoid my own OMS. What's your reaction to that, Sandy? I noticed the way you took your mask and you went, that's the way I feel too.
And the way he says to her, you made me miserable and wretched. I mean, it's not her fault. It wasn't her fault.
Yeah.
She should be saying that to him.
Well, she kind of does. In 36, she said to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies. This, I mean, if each of these sections is going to be characterized by conflict, I think you're right. Like, it kind of sounds like Jephthah's blaming her for what he did. And she's shooting back saying, you're the one that opened your mouth. Do to me according to what you said. And she is his only child. There is no son, no daughter. We'll see this, I think, at the end when we make our points. But one great connection with Ehud and Jephthah. You remember Ehud was walking along and he said to his companions, you guys go ahead, I'm going to go back. Ehud sacrificed himself for his family to do what needed to be done. Jephthah sacrificed his family. This is one of the big themes about the fall of the family throughout the book of Judges. Jephthah here, in order to try to manipulate God, in order to get what he wanted out of this situation, sacrificed his family. Just like Israel, in worshiping all of the other gods of the lands, in order to get what they wanted, were sacrificing their families. They were sacrificing their nation by all of this. Other thoughts or comments? Jake? Yeah.
Well, it might be more to get your comments. And we discussed this in regards to the Gibeonites and the promise that was made, or like the vow that was made, the foolish vow. So in that example, and we've even studied recently in the New Testament, the idea of Herod and his stepdaughter, and what went on with that, and making a foolish vow, and he actually liked John the Baptist, and now he said, I think the expression was because of the people who were around him at this party, he had to follow through and have John beheaded. Can you explain, like, when they would go to such lengths to break all kinds of other covenants and all kinds of other situations, but these horrible, tragic situations, they're like, oh, okay, I've got to follow through with this, and now it can't be broken. Do you care to comment on any of those situations?
Yeah, so I love that you tie it to that and actually stick with your word. But within this text, go back to chapter 10 and verse 15. I guess it starts in verse 14 where they say, we're sorry, God, save us. And God says, cry out to the gods that you've gone to. Let them save you. The people of Israel said to the Lord, we've sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. So they put away their foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And he became impatient over the misery of Israel. You could take that in two ways. And you could make as good a case. I don't know which one we're supposed to do. You could make as good a case for either one. Either he became impatient with the misery of Israel as he was short with Israel, which is, no, I'm done with you. Or you could take it in the sense, and this is what I lean to just because of the bigger character of God to answer your question. God is frustrated with Israel, but they need him. And he knows they need him. And they're saying, we're sorry. And so God becomes impatient with their misery and says, okay, I'll save you. And he gave them Jephthah, and he saved them. If that's right, then he changed his mind and didn't go through. Jephthah's family kicked him out and ran him away. And then they needed him, and they went and they said, you're a mighty warrior. Come and save us. And he said, I thought you didn't want me anymore. You kicked me out. You ran me out of town. He said, no, you can be leader of us. He changed his mind because he could get what he wanted. So he came back to them. Jephthah made a vow to offer his child as a burnt offering. And she says, she comes out and he says, look at this thing that you've done. And listen to his words. I guess it's in verse 35. He says, I cannot take back my vow. First of all, under the Mosaic law, yes, you can. He could. There's a way out of this by paying for it with money. But this is a really good time when he should have said, okay, I can go through with this vow and make a human sacrifice, which God has clearly condemned throughout the scripture. Or Jephthah, being the person that he is, says, nope, I made a promise. You're dead. I mean, this is just bad choices all the way around. I don't know if I've answered your question specifically, but it seems like he should have changed his mind, didn't.
I think ultimately that's kind of where I'm getting at. It's like it's almost, this is one we're breaking. If there's one
Yeah.
breaking, let's break this one instead
Yeah.
of some of the others. And you do, but you at least have an out. Well, but the law tells me to not do this. Obviously, I'm in the first sheep. I don't know, whatever it was.
Yeah.
If you have a sheep, usually going to run out and read it.
So then there's going to be the question. Jonathan and I were talking about this ahead of time. She goes out, she mourns her virginity. This is Jephthah's memorial. Verse 40, the daughters of Israel went, and Israel went out year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite for 4 days of the year. And so is the question, did Jephthah actually go through with it and offer his daughter as a burnt offering? Or did he just say, no, you're going to be devoted to the Lord and you can't have any kids? And first of all, there's no place in the entire Bible where burnt offering is used figuratively. When there's a burnt offering, there's a burnt offering. And the text specifically says that Jephthah did what he said. But, let's leave the door open and say maybe she did offer herself to the Lord and didn't have a family after this. The point of the story is still the same. Jephthah has sacrificed his family. His family is over because of this. The end of the story is the exact same. Okay, too much talking on my Dave. Dave? Mark?
To the contrast of how God offers his child.
Yeah.
And this child is offered as a burnt offering to God, and to what amount? What's thanks, God? Is that what it comes to? Appreciation, and then how God sacrifices his son, where Jephthah will lose his family. God, in his aspect, gains more.
Yeah. I wonder.
I almost think that's what's one of the things that God's almost leading us to see, in the sense of how God delivers and how these judges are delivering.
I read something and I didn't write it down. I knew I should have wrote it down. With all of these things, self-interest, he sacrifices somebody else for the interest of himself and loses everything. Versus Ehud and ultimately Jesus sacrifices himself for other people's interest and gains everything. This is a contrast. Exactly right. Mark, you had your hand up, but can I keep rolling? Can I skip you? No. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Okay. I want to finish some of these things. 12:1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed the Zephon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire. We're mad because we don't look good. We're going to sacrifice you. There's more sacrifice language. Jephthah said to them, I and my people had a great dispute. The literal, I'm going to stick with the literal. A man of great strife I was, and my people, and the Ammonites. Jephthah saying, you just picked a fight with the wrong guy. He says, I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw you would not save me, I took my life and crossed over against the Ammonites. The Lord gave them in my hand. You've come to me this day to fight against me. And Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, you are fugitives from Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. That sounds exactly like the Ehud story, except the Ephraimites are the victims this time. And any fugitives of Ephraim said, let me go over there. The men of Gilead said to them, are you an Ephraimite? And they said, no, I'm not an Ephraimite. And they said, then say Shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell, based upon words. It's an empty word. but based upon a word, the family of God is destroyed. You see conflict, you see the fall of the family, you see self-interest, you see words in all of these stories. Let me just show you one more thing, and then we'll get to the point here at the very end of this. I don't know if we'll have time for that, but Jephthah, in speaking with Ammon says, I don't think I'm going to have time to go over this map with you, but there's one thing that I do want to show you. In verse 11:13, the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel, coming up from Egypt, took away my land from the Arnon of the Jabbok to the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore it peacefully. And Jephthah says in verse 15, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of Ammon. For they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness of the Red Sea. And if you will go back, let's skip reading this, but you can do it later on. If you will read Deuteronomy Chapter 2, there's the summary of this story. And God specifically says, when you go to the land of Esau, Edom, leave them alone. Don't fight against them. They're your brother. And he says, when you go to the land of Moab, leave them alone. Don't fight against them. And when you go to the land of Ammon, they're Lot's sons. Leave them alone. And God says, I have given them their land. And the crazy thing, I'm not even 100% sure what to do with this, Jephthah's entire argument to the Ammonites is, I didn't take your land. We've been peaceful with you all along. God told us not to pick a fight with you. We haven't picked a fight with you. We've been peaceful with you. And can you see just how grossly ironic that is now in the midst of this story where everybody in God's family is picking a fight with everybody in God's family, and the way that Jephthah handles this situation with the enemies who are oppressing them is to say, hey, we've always been peaceful with you. It's dripping with irony. It's crazy what he says. So, before I make my last, I guess, application points, any notes that you want to say about this story? This is what I hope you do. I hope you go home with this starter bread, with Jacob's sourdough starter bread. And I hope you read through each of these stories thinking about conflict and words and self-interest and manipulation. And as you read through the story, see what you see. And then text me about it. I want to know what you find. Notice at chapter 12 and verse 7. Judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in the city of Gilead. What's missing? There's no rest. There's no rest at the end of this story. There's no more rest at the end of the toilet bowl. And what Israel needs is a king to lead them to God and to bring them together to accomplish what they need to do as a nation together. And Jephthah's not the guy. A couple practical things for us, lessons. Contentious people destroy relationships and ruin families. I know that sounds like a contentious thing to say without much explanation, but you can be a person who thinks it's super fun to stir the pot and pick a fight and always be the guy who argues in the room, like Jephthah, but the end is that you've sacrificed Israel in your own. It's not going to end well. These people never end well. And you can see that. What we need in our homes and in our church and in our country is peacemakers to bring us together and to lead us in the way we should go, not pot stirrers. Watch your words. Words matter. And people who just spout off rash vows without thinking through the things that they say bring destruction upon their families and upon the groups that they live. And then, Dave, this is your point. Service and sacrifice to others is always greater than self-serving and manipulating in order to. So I think about Philippians chapter 2. Do nothing from selfish ambition. Don't merely serve yourself. Don't serve yourself, serve others. And what we do is we follow. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her in our homes. Sacrifice for your family, not sacrifice your family. Thanks.